Oh, hey, how's it going? Right on, right on. Welcome to the neighborhood bike shop. And this is the final episode of Arlo's bike that I've been rebuilding, a mountain bike that started out as an 8700 Trek. We found out that the frame just was not usable. It was too dangerous to keep using. So we replaced the frame with this Gary Fisher Big Sur Genesis. And it's approximately the exact same size. It's a very strong, nice frame. It's like really a nice frame. And I'm just stacking his parts on it. But in that process, I have found a lot of different things that were messed up or just weren't functioning on this bike. And I'll go through some of them with you. One of them, the biggest one, was the frame. And the next biggest one is the front wheel. The front wheel has a bullseye hub on it, which, if you know mountain bikes and bikes in general, bullseye hubs are really, really desirable. They're very excellent hubs, and they're usually very expensive. So I really, really wanted to make this front wheel with the bullseye hub on it originally just right. But let me switch over to a different view and show you what I was talking about. All right, this is the rim I was talking about with the bullseye hub. And it's a very, very nice hub. It's got a little bit of damage on it to the marker that's wrapped around the center. I'm not sure exactly how that damage occurred. It was there on it when I got it, but it's still a beautiful hub. But let me focus down on the truing stand and just give it a spin and let you see what I was talking about. Okay, you see that? That whoop, 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 whoop. Okay, what I ended up doing is I went through and I retensioned the entire wheel. Well, actually, I started off by just trying to true it. I just went through and just like tightened up spokes and did my deal on it. Got it fairly true, but that hump was still there. And I knew I had to get rid of it, and you can only tension so far before you're over tensioning. And so I went back, kind of loosened up everything, went to the opposite side to try to pull the hump over, tensioning the opposite side equally across, and then loosening up the hump side, hoping or tightening up the hump side and loosening the opposite side so that it would pull the hump in towards it, so it would like whoop, wouldn't do that whoop whoop. But that did not work. I spent probably 4 hours dicking around with it, because once I get going on something like OCD on it, I just will keep going and going and going and going. I'll spend way too much time on some things. And that's why sometimes I get in trouble for spending way too much time on some things. But anyhow, on this one, it stumped me. So I made a post on Facebook to my friends that are also, I have a lot of bike mechanic friends, telling them what I was up against and what I was dealing with. And a lot of people said, untension everything, retension it up to the 12 to 15 pounds per spoke to make sure it's all evenly tensioned, then retrue it from there. They also suggested tensioning it to there and then leaving it overnight. So somehow or other, the steel in the rim or the aluminum in the rim would relax maybe and go back to the same place. And I did that as well. I left it overnight after I got the tension out of the spokes and retensioned everything to the appropriate tension. But then I went back and I tried to chew it the rest of the way, and I still have that hump. Even though it's almost straight enough to use, it's still not straight. And it's got a significant hump, like almost a 1/4 inch worth of a hump. And it's only in one spot. Everywhere else, the measurements are identical until you get to this one spot where it's humped out. And coincidentally, that's where the damage to this wheel had been. There was damage on this wheel when it came in. It had a missing spoke, and something was messed up with it. And after like spending hours and hours marking each single spoke with a different color of dry erase board marker so I could wipe it off, I realized that the wheel was about 1/4 of the wheel was not laced appropriately. It wasn't laced right. So I had to undo a bunch of stuff, relace it, got it relaced completely before I did the retensioning and all the other stuff and all the other tricks. The very first thing I did was fix the damage to the spokes and make sure it was all right. And once I got it relaced, I went through that entire process and, like I said, put it out on Facebook. got back suggestions, followed those suggestions, and it still just has a hump in it. And I showed it to another one of my buddies who is like one of my bike gurus, one of the guys who is one of my teachers. And he said, yeah, that rim's just done. It's just done. So I had to replace it. And I chose a Ritchie Rock Comp rim on a specialized hub, which will match. It'll match the frame and all that kind of stuff because the rear hub was different than the Bullseye. It wasn't a Bullseye hub. And so this one is going to replace it. It's nice and true. I went through it, made sure it was nice and true. And it'll look great on this bike, and it'll bring a little continuity between the front and rear hubs, both being silver. And it's going to perform just fine. But unfortunately, I could not use the hub, that Bullseye hub, and that wheel. It just won't work. So now on to the next stuff. All right, to move on to the bike, where we were at when we left off last time was I had just put on the cables and some of the housings and the front and rear derailleur. So now I need to finish off the derailleur housings. Oh, by the way, on the front derailleur right here, in test fitting and making sure that this was located in the right location, I actually strung it up, so you're not going to get to see me tighten that one, and other than I'm going to do set screws and mess with a little bit, but it's pretty close already. Anyhow, the front derailleur is already done, so really all we need is to finish up the rear derailleur. So I've got a section of housing that I've cut to the right length, and then on this particular derailleur, it's got a boot that goes over the derailleur adjustment knob, which I've turned all the way in and then back out a half turn, which will give me a little bit of movement in both directions when I go to tune it. And then because it's being hidden, instead of using a fancy ferrule, red anodized cool ferrule, I'm just using a black anodized ferrule. And on all of my higher end bikes, like when I'm building them for special people, I always use aluminum ferrules. I never ever use plastic ones unless they're like for Huffy's or Walmart bikes, and I've done a couple of those recently, so I'm on one of those. Anyhow, the point is this is going to be hidden. So the very first thing, as always, throw a bit of lube through the housing. Then I'm going to put on my fancy red ferrule and then guide that into the housing, setting the ferrule in place and then guiding the cable through it, setting the opposite ferrule, the ferrule that would go into the derailleur cable. Sometimes these are a challenge, especially for old guys like me. Okay, I've got it on. I'm going to set it in place to the best of my ability, knowing that it may not be completely set. Now I've got those in place, I can slip the fancy ferrule into its stop, throw the cable through the derailleur, moving the rubber piece up a bit, setting the aluminum ferrule that's going to be hidden. And for the time being, I'm just going to leave this up until I get it tuned. And then after I get it tuned, then I will slide it back over the top of it as a protective covering for the entire thing. So cable goes through very simply. And on these bikes, when they're set up correctly, you shouldn't have to do any fancy tricks. You put it through, you get it seated into the location it needs to be so that it's lined with kind of the cable grooves that they've put in place already. Pull on it, tighten it up. Then I'm going to go to an open place on the cable, stretch it, which moves the derailleur, but it also seats everything and makes sure everything's in there. And yes, I did get a little bit of slack out of that. Go back to the stop nut, get that slack out of there, and tighten it up. Now, when you tighten up these stops on all derailleur bolts, they're all usually 5mm bolts, and they need to be set to 5 Newton meters of torque. And that's where that comes in handy. Now this one's done. I just got to clip it off, and we'll move on to the brakes. Right on, let's do this. All right, now we're going to put the brakes on this bike. Now there's a couple different things that were happening on this bike before that are not going to happen in the future unless they absolutely have to. Before, on the brakes, they had a doubler. This is what makes you capable of using a short pull lever with a long pull brake caliper. Now, all linear brakes, or most linear brakes that I know of, are long pull. And that means that they will not behave really well with a short pull lever. So how do you know that you've got a short pull or a long pull lever? Well, the first thing that you do is you measure from the pivot point on the lever itself to the anchor point of the end of the cable. Now, in my research, I've found that 30 millimeters is the boundary. Anything below 30 millimeters between this point and that point is a short pull. Anything longer than 30 millimeters is a long pull. So in theory, these are long pull and do not need a doubler. So I'm going to replace the doubler with just a standard, cable noodle, right? So one of the very first things I'm going to do is I'm going to install the brakes. But before I install the brakes, I want to show you something else. These brakes came in with a set of pads that were pretty gnarly. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to see these super well, but one set looks like it's just destroyed. It's just gone. There's nothing left. Any of the grooves that would indicate that it's worn out are already worn away. This pad is done, without a doubt. Now, on the front, there were these pads, and they still have a little bit of the groove, but they've got this weird kind of, they weren't positioned right on the rim originally, so they've worn very awkwardly. So I just went ahead and replaced all the brake pads with brand new ones. Yeah. So, as usual on all of my stuff, especially on these posts, when you're installing linear cable brakes or linear calipers, anything on a post, it needs to have a little bit of grease on it. Like it swivels on that point, and that's what makes it swivel smoothly. Now, I also put a little bit of grease on the bolt itself, and that's just to keep it from rusting and interacting with this and having it be able to come out fairly easy. The way that these are assembled and the way that we put the torque on them, it holds them in place, so they're not going to just fall out. You don't need Loctite on them or anything like that. But on many post brake calipers, you're going to find 3 different holes that are where you set the pin, this little pin, into it to create the tension using the spring in the caliper. Well, when there's only one, you only got one choice, so that's where it goes. But when there's 3, I usually go to the top one, which will create the most spring tension. But on this one, we've only got one, so we just go to one. And once that's in there, cable or bolt, cable. And I'll do the same on the other side, but I'm just going to go through them. So, okay, now that I've got these pretty close, I have not torqued them yet. I will torque them, but I'm going to wait until I see how they perform, because I don't know whether I need to take them off again, re-grease them, adjust them, or whatnot. So I'm just going to leave that there, throw the front wheel on. This is the front wheel that I described as a replacement for the original bullseye hubbed rim. And people will over tighten these quick releases quite often. I try to avoid that. I want them to be snug, but I don't want it to be like, you know, you have to have some kind of muscle man to come in and repair them. Okay, the next step from here for me is adjusting the brake pad, because while I've got the tension off of the spring, like there's a spring on the back of the caliper that you can either leave in place and it makes it spring away, or you can remove it so that you can have no tension and quite easily press the pad against the rim. I use my finger underneath the length of the pad, this finger under here, making sure that it's not overlapping to the inside, and that's a good starting spot. Okay, these brake pads, they might need adjustment in the future. I'm sure they might. It's always good. What I'm doing is just kind of the starting spot. I don't know for sure that's going to be exactly where they are. I might have to do some micro adjustment on them a little bit later on, but that gets them close enough. Then from there, I find out whether or not my fancy aluminum brake ferrules will fit inside of the noodle. They will not. Some of them will. I have some that step down from 5 to 4, and they will not either. You have to have a pretty severe step down to get a ferrule inside of this. But this piece acts like the ferrule for the cable. So I'm going to put a dab of Tri-Flow into it. And also, I have not cut this cable to the right length yet. So I am finding out right now how long this cable needs to be. So I am putting the noodle into the end of the caliper that receives the noodle. I'm pressing it up against the rim right here. And I'm also looking at the spacing of my cables and how they're looking, because I want them to look right. So I know about right there is where I need to cut this. So instead of, disassembling everything, I simply pull the cable most of the way out, far enough that I know that I'm not going to be cutting the cable. And I make my adjustment. And I always make my adjustment a little bit extra, so I'll probably adjust it twice. But, you know, measure once, or measure twice, cut once. Or if you have to, measure it so that you've got a little bit of leeway, so that if it's not the right length, you can adjust it. Push the cable back through, introduce the noodle, and I am reusing the rear brake cable from this bike, so it's got a little bit of wonkety on the end of it, but it's plenty long for the front cable. Now I'm making sure it's set in the ferrule next to the lever, and then pulling it through so that it's set the right way. And then with none of the spring tension on the bike itself or on the calipers themselves, I'm going to create enough loose that I can get the cable through the little area. And they usually, these cable stops have like a shoulder on them. So the cable stop bends over the back of the caliper, and it creates like a gap where you can slide the cable through. And it keeps the cable from moving around as you're doing adjustments later on. And I'm going to get it up fairly close. Like seriously, I'm just going to close it up and tighten it up. Now I'm not going to go nuke on the tight. I'm just going to get the tight fairly close so I know that we're within the right range, because these are going to have to be adjusted anyhow. And then to be able to tuck the cable back behind the caliper arm back here, you need to leave almost the length of the caliper arm worth of cable sticking out. So don't cut that one short. Definitely cut that one long, and that'll come into play later. So now that we've got this all kind of set into place, notice that that cable came out of the ferrule on the noodle. Okay, time out. Okay, time back in. What I did is the edge of the housing kind of had a little part that was clipping out, so it wasn't settling into the noodle ferrule the way it needed to. So I turned it off and made sure that it was seated, because you guys don't need to see all that stuff. Now I'm taking the springs for the caliper arms and putting them in place. Then I'm pulling the brakes. Now I can already tell that it did in fact settle further. So I'm going to readjust it a little bit, and we should be ready to move on to the rear. Nice. What I found out is, yes, we can get away with just the noodle. It does not need the brake doubler. We've got plenty of power at this end on the lever. And even though I may be able to need to adjust the caliper arm spring, like how far this one's pulling out or how far this one's pulling out, to make sure that there's good clearance between them, we are getting great stopping power. Ooh, we might be there on this one. Okay, on to the next one and on to the rear. Now onto the rear one. This one's going to be a little bit more interesting. We're coming from a cable stop right here. We're using a certain amount of cable to get around, and then it'll hook into a noodle, just like on the front, instead of a doubler, and take everything where we need to get it. Now I had to cut this a little bit shorter, and every time I cut these things, one of the things you really want to have around when you're doing this stuff is a pick. Now, I like to have several different picks that have different shapes and sizes and way they bend. But the whole point of it, for me, the pick and this process, is that when you make a cut, if it's a nice clean cut and you don't need to file it down, you can just poke that in there, getting a nice, clean opening that you know everything's going to settle into. Okay, and a little bit of OL, a little tri-flow in there. And brake ferrule. So I'm going to go brake ferrule or cable ferrule. This one of the fancy anodized ones. into the cable, and I'm going to go ahead and mate those right there. Get the cable going through while I'm here, because I already know the ferrules are not going to fit inside of these noodles. Little tri-flow inside of the noodle. Get it through the noodle and seated on the cable housing. Pulling it through and then seating it into its location where it's going to be. Now I know that this is approximately in the right place, but I'm probably going to have to cut this cable right here. So I'm going to install the rear caliper arms. And these rear caliper arms were a little bit different than the other ones in the fact that there's a brake bridge. And when there's a brake bridge, you need some extra hardware. You can't just put it on using the exact same hardware. You have to use some extended hardware. Little grease on the posts. And I'm making sure that the spring on the caliper is unset. And on this rear one, there are 3 different holes. So because I want the most power out of this spring that I can possibly get, I'm going to put it in the highest hole, which will give me the most twist on it and give me the greatest amount of pressure, not to mention flying parts. Okay. For right now, I'm just going to leave the brake pad a little bit loose in there. I'm not going to overdo it. Get the other caliper arm located on the post. Making sure it goes into the 3rd hole. I'm going to double check that this one went into the 3rd hole as well. Okay, perfect, perfect. Okay, the very next step is to install that very hardware that I was just talking about that goes in over the top of this. And the first thing that we're going to have is a separator. This will separate the brake bridge, which gives it rigidity as it closes, from the caliper. And then there's a washer on the bolt as well. And that bolts right in to this caliper's mounting location. Same thing on the other side. Spacer located to the right place. Okay, I'm going to leave this a little bit loose and kind of center it, like center it this way. Make sure that it's fairly even between the two. Then I'm going to go ahead and lock those down fairly tight. Not torqued completely, but fairly tight. In these cases, I don't always like using my tri-wrenches. This is usually where I'll use a T-handle because the tri-wrench interferes with the tire. But for right now, we're just going to do this. Okay. Now, I'm going to hook in to the caliper, making sure that the spring is released. And kind of look at what I've got cable-wise. And you can already see that this thing is just way too long. So, I'm going to take off the noodle. I'm going to put the noodle back into the seating spot. And then I'm going to see about where I want the cable to sit. Still giving it room to move. So I'm thinking about there. take the noodle out, pull this all the way off the cable, make a cut, make a poke, and redo. All right, that's going to be way cleaner. So now I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the other side with the brake pads, as far as there's no pressure on them, so I can move them to their location appropriately, get them pressed up, and tighten down into their first location, knowing that we may adjust some of this stuff a little bit later. Actually, in the final tune, I always go back and make sure that the pads are aligned the right way and that they're not going to squeal like a banshee when they're doing what they do. So I'm going to like kind of time out and get in behind this because I need to work on this in a way that I can see it, so I get it really close, and you're not going to be able to see it. You're just going to be looking at the back of my bald head. Okay, cool. Time in. All I just had to do was move around, get some room, and adjust it from that side so I could see where it was going appropriately on this side. And then this is that same thing that we've done over and over. There's no tension on these calipers. I'm able to pull them close together. That's also where I adjust my brake pads and get us a preliminary starting point for this brake. Knowing that things might shift and change a little bit once we put it under tension and grab at it. So, some spring action on there. These springs are really very tight, which is the way I like it. We have a good pull. Nice. Perfect. Now that I'm satisfied with the way that that looks, I'm going to take my torque wrench and torque this until I hit 5 Newton meters. Sweet. And again, on the excess cable, I'm going to make sure that I have enough that I can tuck it behind the spring retention arm, and it will hide back behind here. So I'm going to kind of measure it down to about where the logo is on there. Cut it off. All right. Now, this whole bike just needs a tune and some little cable ferrules on the ends, the crimp ferrules on the ends, and this bike will be done. And I'm going to come back and do an overview on everything that happened, like all the parts that came off, all the changes, everything that was new. And this bike is going to be pretty spectacular, I think. I think it's going to ride really, really well. I think it's going to be, well, I know it's going to be very safe. And it's just reborn from where it was before. It was dead before, and now it's come back to life. And it's Easter time, so seems appropriate. All right, so the final thing that I need to do on this bike, other than put on the pedals, I put on the pedals when you guys weren't looking. They're just cheap plastic pedals, so I just slipped them on. So the final bit of this is the chain. Now, if you remember, when I took this chain off, it had no quick link on it. It was just a hard pin. And because I don't have the hard pin, any of the hard pins around that I could replace it and break it off and do it appropriately with, I have a bunch of quick links that'll work exactly fine and also make it much more convenient. I'm all about the quick links. The pins work. They work fine. It's old school, but at the same time, it makes it so you can't really take your chain on and off and work on it very well. It's always kind of just a pain in the butt. So, grabbing a couple quick links out the bag, get the chain all straightened out, which can be kind of fun with chains. Gonna go here, there, up over the smallest cog, kind of down into this location. Then I'm going to take this end of the chain and move it over the derailleur, aligning it with the appropriate pulls. Install my quick link on one side, quick link on the other side, and then I'm going to immediately take it off the small chain ring in the front so I've got easy access to the whole thing. Set it in place, and this is where my cool chain breaking tool comes in. Now, you've seen chain breakers where they just crush. Well, this crushes and opens. That means you can set a chain or a quick link or open a quick link, and that's what I really like about these. In this case, I'm going to be setting the quick link, so I get it in the right place, just like that. It's set. Because this chain and this transmission were being used on the bike together before, it should be fine, but I don't know whether the chainstay length changed at all. So sweet. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put cable end crimps on everything, and then I'm going to go back through, tune everything, spray it down with a little bit of shine, a little bit of, on the frame I use just regular furniture polish, just like a little furniture polish on there, makes it nice and shiny. Remember when you do that, like I just sprayed all this shit behind here with furniture polish, so don't be all willy-nilly like me, man. Make it intentional. Anyhow, this bike is done other than the final little bits. I can even take this piece, the boot that goes up over the top of the adjustment bolt on the back of this derailleur, and get it seated into place, and boom, bada bing. So the next thing you're going to see is this whole bike completely done and just a breakdown of what I did. Okay, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. It's been pretty fun. Oh, and I've got some information for you guys about my health that I'm also going to go through at the end of this video. So, all right, all in all, I think this bike turned out really, really good. I feel much better that we've got a safe frame on it and that we've got a solid front wheel. Let me go through everything that happened on it. When I started working on it, I found out that the frame that was being used, which was an 8700 Trek that had carbon top tube, down tube, and seat tube on it, but the aluminum lugs where they were connecting to the carbon tubes was separating. It was delaminating, so we had to replace the frame. So we replaced it with this Gary Fisher Big Sur Genesis, which was next to the exact same size as far as, you know, the stack height, the seat height, the rear chainstay lengths. Everything is very, very similar on it. Then when I went through it, the very first thing that I noticed was the front wheel and how it was out of whack. Hang on. Get me a chair, old man. So the the front wheel was just out of whack. That's in the earlier part of the video. So I replaced it with a really nice Ritchie rim with a specialized hub that kind of matches the silver on both hubs. So visually, it's more satisfying, but it doesn't have that awesome bullseye hub that was on here before. And of course, all the parts that come off of this that didn't go back onto it are going to go back to the client so that they can reuse them or whatnot. I always give them the option to donate it to the Horde. So like whatever's left over, I can use on someone else's bike to help them get through. Then after I figured out what was going on with the wheels, the front wheel, and where I was at on all those, then I went through and replaced and transferred over all the componentry from the other bike onto this bike. All of it went across very, very quickly. There's a couple things that I'm going to have to talk to the client about. This bike, when it came in, had these pink or purple water bottle cages. This one's a really cool snake one. And they don't really fit the color of this now. And then also, because of the front derailleur and its relationship where it has to be in order to run the front chainring, interferes with this water bottle. So realistically, you're only going to run one water bottle on this bike. And I think I'm going to try to convince the customer to go with this cool white composite bottle cage because I think it'll contrast everything and look very nice on the bike. Then once we got everything transferred over, I put on all new cables, all new cable housings, and then on the ends of each one of the cable housings are red anodized aluminum ferrules. So it makes it a little bit more blingy, like instead of just having the little black plastic ferrules on there, these ones have a little bit of shine, so it makes it pop a little bit. And then I also removed these two doublers, which make a short pole compatible with a long pole, basically. And we did not need to do that. This is set up all for long poles, so it should be just fine. Then went through, reassembled it, made sure we're good to go. I'm going to go do some test rides on it. But other than that, I think this bike is done and ready for Arlo. I'm excited to give them the news. It's actually taken a little while. So I'm going to share with you guys what's been going on with me. I have an autoimmune disease. They believe it's lupus, and they've been trying to get control of it so we can figure out what's going on with it. But we cannot get a confirmed diagnosis without having evidence that they can reproduce for anybody else. In other words, lupus creates a weird mask, almost like rosacea on your face. It also creates sores on your body all over. Creates weird scaly, almost like dry skin. I don't know what that condition's called, where you can like have dry skin or whatever like that in different places. It causes muscles to ache and joints to ache, like really badly, like hurt you badly. And it can mess with you in a lot of different ways. Now, here's the thing. I'm finding out that they can't really treat this with a whole lot of stuff other than nutrition and daily behavior. But once we get a handle on what's going on, then we can tailor my daily routine so that I can kind of try to meet those guidelines the best I can. I've also recently had two molars out of the back of my jaw removed. I swear to God, the dentist broke my jaw when he was trying to pry it out. Like, it felt like he was standing on my chest and just prying. I could feel my lower jaw just twist and like that. And then at some point there was a that I felt inside of my skull. And that's why I say I think it was broken. Plus my lips got super swollen up because that dude was digging in with both hands trying to get all the leverage he could. So he just jacked up this side of my face. It was swollen up really bad, and my jaw was swollen up really bad for about a week and a half afterwards, which is longer than it should be. Right now, everything's kind of calm. My health seems to be settling a little bit. but I've got a bunch of bills and I need help with them. And there's recently been several people that have donated to my fund, my medical fund. They're on Facebook, so I'm going to thank them directly in private messages. Recently, I think someone from this channel actually stopped in and made a donation, and I'm truly, truly grateful for that. And if any of you feel like helping me out with my bills, and I'm guessing there's going to be about $5,000 worth of bills that I'm going to have to follow up on with all these different medical things that I'm having done. So if you can help me, I greatly appreciate it. It's down in the notes below. And if you can donate, please do. Other than that, I hope you give this video a like and a thumbs up. And if you watched it all the way to the end, I know you're one of my real friends and one of my real fans and troopers. And if you have any comments or questions or criticisms within good taste, put that into the comments. I love reading the comments. I love interacting with you guys and finding out what you want. And I guess we're now at the end of this episode of the Neighborhood Bike Shop and the conversion of this bike into what it is now. I hope you dig it, Arlo. Okay. Love you guys. Thank you for tuning in. I'll talk to you later. Peace.